On today's episode, we hear a cry about people's behaviors post-mask mandate, discuss why Cruella De Vil is a feminist icon, see a premature declaration of victory over the COVID regime, learn how white people invented race, compare how much better off medieval peasants were without capitalism, and learn that the price of freedom just costs wearing simple cloth masks over your face. This is Cringe Posts. Hello, friends. Welcome to this episode of the Cringe Posts podcast. This is the show where we go through our social media feeds. We find the cringiest cultural and political takes, and we break them down, talk about what they are assuming that is wrong, what the general argument flaw is, and we like to laugh along the way. My name is Donald, and I am here with my co-host, Britt. And before we get started, we just want to remind everyone to leave a like, a subscription, a comment, all that good stuff. It really helps us out. Even just one of those actions goes a long way, so we really appreciate that. And a reminder, if you are listening to this and you want to see these posts visually and you're not watching our YouTube or Odyssey channels, you can do so by going to cringeposts.com, where we have a visual companion for you to see these posts if you want to do that. So before we make fun of other people's posts, we always like to look at our own bad historical posts. And so this week we look at Britt from February of 2011, who tweets, "Feels like a noodle."
And that was only like 10 years ago, which is really embarrassing. That's only 10, or I guess 11 years ago. Oh my goodness.
That's the funny thing is, even, I don't know, compared to some of our other cringes, this one isn't that bad. You know, it's just, it is what it is. But yeah, the time gap of thinking, man, that in the grand scheme of things wasn't that long ago, and I felt the need to tweet this is kind of
well. And it's interesting as I go back and look through it, and it's like, okay, maybe there's definitely, if anyone wants to go look, you can see my Twitter handle on the visual guide. You can go look back at my history, but I had a lot of weird stuff that was like nonsensical, but part of me also thinks is like, hey, I think we were all still figuring out like what Twitter was supposed to be used for, you know? But regardless, this doesn't really fit into any category of useful. Like, it's just like, I don't even know what that means, you know? It's like, you know, like kind of like limp. I don't know. It's just a weird thing. And obviously, I when I look back through a lot of my tweets and Facebook posts, like I just see like kind of like the beginning of like subtweeting. Like I don't think that's the case here, but there's a lot of stuff like I'm feeling mad, or like, you know, I'm having a great time and this person's not here, or things like that. It's just kind of like nasty and psychotic, and I guess it's more like sociopathic teenager boy. But anyways, I was just like, what a dumb thing to say. At least I spelled everything right.
Yeah, and you added the proper punctuation, so you're
Yes.
good there. Check.
I didn't capitalize. I didn't capitalize the first letter.
Well, you might argue, you know, the older format for posting on Twitter and Facebook seemed
Britt
more
Espinosa
like
feels like a noodle. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that it used your name as part of it. I don't know that Twitter necessarily did, but at the very least, it was probably a carryover from Facebook. Is my guess there, but.
Yeah,
that may be where you were drawing that from. But yeah, I it's funny because I think about all these outlets that you have in your youth to express sentiments, whether that's something actually emotional or if it's just goofy nonsense like this. And there's something really painful about seeing the sort of immature, just kiddish things that you'll think and say expressed to the world at large, publicly accessible. It's not just between you and a friend who's over, or you, I don't know, with your family. So anyway, we'll move on to our first post here, and this one is from verified Paul Krugman, who, of course, we love to feature on this show. And he tweets, "A prediction about masking. Soon we'll be seeing many incidents in which those who choose to protect themselves with KN95s, etc., face harassment, even violence, because this was never about freedom." And, you know, on the one hand, there is something to the idea that now that we are moved beyond many of the mandates of masks, that there should be this freedom to choose. You know, if you as an individual feel that wearing a KN95 is going to be protective for you in your situation, you should be free to do that. And you know, I should also be free to judge you for that if you know, I so choose. But it is just peculiar and rich that the people who spent the last 2 years harassing and absolutely straw manning and vilifying anyone who wanted to live free and not be under these cumbersome regulations or stupid mask mandates that did not do anything to help. The names that they called people like you and I, the categories they would put us under. And now that the mandates are lifted, now they're the ones being like, oh, we're going to be the victims of harassment. We're going to be the ones who are oppressed and like, no, you need to learn. Not in a violent way, but like, you need to learn that there are repercussions to forcing people into absolute nonsense against their will, and you shouldn't just get off scot-free like, oops, I guess we were wrong. All right, moving on. You know, like, you need to actually reconcile the fact that you made people do things that were ultimately harmful and detrimental to their health in the name of protecting people, but ultimately, as we know, for the grasps of power, not for anyone's actual safety.
It reminds me of the Frank Herbert quote, which is, when I am weaker than you, I ask you for freedom because that is according to your principles. When I am stronger than you, I take away your freedom because that is according to my principles. And when you see these people that are, we had an interaction on Twitter with one of these folks because he lives in San Francisco. I can't remember his name, but he posted, he's like, I was wearing a mask going down the street and people were looking at me weird, and someone was saying, wow, like, why are you wearing that? And he's like, that was just so much persecution. And it's like, dude, one, if you behave like a crazy person, you know, expect people to treat you as such, or at least say something. I don't want anyone to ever hurt you, but like, you know, if you're going to do weird stuff in public, like, that's just the natural ramification. And then two, it's like, where were you when people that didn't want to wear masks, literally they're the same people that are calling for like grace and like, you know, be kind to the people that are still choosing to wear masks, were the very ones also like saying like, hey, you should scream at people and don't let anyone be comfortable in public if they're not wearing a mask. You know, living here in Washington, Seattle, wouldn't wear a mask. You know, people would say things to us all the time. You know, we'd go out, really rude things. And then you don't have to look very far on the internet to see people having freakouts or screaming at people, you know, and it's like, where were you, Paul Krugman, when this was happening? It's the only reason you're saying it now is because the tide has kind of turned against you. We all realized that you were lying, and you don't want to be held accountable to it. And I'm not saying this is the equivalent thing, but it's like the masks has kind of become a symbol of a lie in a lot of ways. It's a symbol of, hey, I believed this lie that ruined hundreds of thousands of people's lives, put tens of thousands of businesses out of business, you know, actually killed millions of people in other countries due to starvation from lack of supply chains. You just have to look at the World Health Organization for that. And it's like, that's what this symbolizes, right? And there's other symbols in society that are not, if you wore them out in society, like, people would react negatively to them, right? And that's not to say I justify, like, we are on the side of, hey, like, even if you see someone out on the street and they're wearing a swastika or they're self-proclaimed Nazi, it's like, I don't think you should punch them. Like, I don't adhere to that, but I understand why people would be upset about seeing someone with that, especially like if you were in Germany or somewhere, because it's like, hey, like, there's a big lie that occurred. This is a symbol of that lie. Millions of people were killed or hurt by this ideology. And I think you can kind of say the same thing about this mask aspect. It's like, it symbolizes something that hurt a lot of people, and it was a lie. And so if people are going to react a little bit negatively towards that, I think that's totally understandable. I don't think anyone should get hurt over it, obviously. Just like I don't think anyone should have been hurt over not wearing a mask.
It's when you were talking about the aspect of, you know, the people sort of flipping the script and saying, well, now we need to be kind. I think this exactly mirrors the rhetoric of everyone leading up to the 2020 election who was a Biden supporter. It's time for unity. We want to bring everyone together. And then as soon as they won that election, they're like, we're putting together lists of people who voted for and supported Trump. You know, so it's not even it's not even, as we've seen, where on the one hand they're gonna, have this awful power like they did during COVID, and now that the script is flipped on them, now they're calling for reconciliation. The moment the CDC demands that we wear masks again, they're going to be just as vicious, just as pernicious, and just as evil. Do not buy the crocodile tears coming from people like Krugman, who are saying we need to appeal to a higher principle. No, they don't believe in those principles, because if they did, you would have seen it play out in when it's hard. People only claim principles and betray them when they don't have them. If you have a principle, you have the principle when it's tough and when it's not tough. So
absolutely,
there, that to me is the biggest giveaway, and why, like you said, like we shouldn't ever, in my opinion, require people to not wear a mask. But like you said, we should also be free to express our distaste or our sentiment for that especially in the public square. I don't think these people would, your swastika example, or maybe something that's even more culturally relevant to specific sects of the country, like a Confederate symbol. That might be something where someone's very proudly wearing a Confederate flag, and if they came up to Seattle, they would get looked, they might get, harassed or whatever. And, I'm neither here nor there about the specific, you can argue both ways about it being a harmful symbol or if it's a, historic one. Regardless,
I would never wear it, but yeah.
Yeah, I would never wear it either, but I also don't have an affinity to that. But the point is, like, I don't think you should ever physically or violently prevent someone from doing that, but I also don't think that, like, if that's a harmful symbol to you, I wouldn't say you can't act disgusted that way, or and you and I would take it a step further. I also think that a business owner should be able to refuse service to someone wearing a symbol like that if they want to. There's freedom of association is a great right, and I think that freedom of association to some degree includes being able to scoff in the public square when you see something you don't like.
And to be clear, right, like, I am totally fine with a business requiring you to wear masks if you go inside of it. I'm not okay when the government says, hey, business, you must enforce this, right? Because It's like, that's where we have the issue, right? And lest we be painted as having a double standard, I'm totally fine with the business asking that, and I won't patronize that business, right? Exactly. But the problem when the government mandates, hey, all businesses have to conform to this mandate, is you can't actually differentiate which businesses you want to patronize. You can't actually give that market feedback, right? For businesses to take signals from. And so you and I are for like freedom to do whatever you want to do in terms of, and then also have feedback happen to you, as long as it's like an actual feedback mechanism, not some forced thing from the top at a federal or state level or local level, for that matter.
Exactly. And for what it's worth, when a business is brave enough to try to either buck the rules or at least express dissent, I'm all for that as well. Shout outs to the Newcastle Blazing Onion. If anyone is in Newcastle, Washington, that Blazing Onion was posted on Facebook, and I was very surprised. Vocally against the lockdowns, vocally against mask mandates.
That's
and
a chain restaurant, right?
Yeah. I think they might be franchised by individual owners or something. But regardless,
that's awesome.
that particular branch did. And so my wife and I were like, all right, we'll patronize them, because even if they're having this state enforced mask mandate, they took a bold stand and even speaking out. So good for them.
Okay. I want to shout out a business too. Candor Coffee in Kent. No mask mandate, no vaccine mandate. Just did what they want to do. Fantastic coffee. And if you go look at their reviews, the only bad reviews are people that freaked out because their baristas didn't wear masks, and neither did they require their patrons to. But they always admit that their coffee was good, so it's a good coffee place, even if the triggered Karens realize it is.
All right, moving to our next post. This one is an article from the New York Times, and the tweet with the article reads: "If you set aside the dog napping and puppy skinning plots (parentheses) which are admittedly hard to overlook, and parentheses, Disney's version of Cruella has always been a bit of a feminist fantasy." Man,
did you read the article?
I skimmed it, but I mean, I just want to say, this is so funny to me, because this sounds like when you're arguing something and you're trying to make a compelling point and someone else comes up next to you and says, yeah, I agree with you on this, and then makes the worst argument possible. I cannot imagine anyone who's like a pro-feminist movement ally or whatever wanting this to be on their team. The literal cartoon villain who kidnaps and skins dogs. Yeah, she's kind of a feminist icon. It's just so good.
The headline, or what is it called, the little part underneath the headline of it?
Oh, sure, the subheading.
The subheading. It's let me put it here so people can see it. It's like from a calm socialite, she morphed into an unhinged puppy kidnapper and then a vindictive glamour puss. Why don't we hate her? It's like, dude, I've always hated her. Like, she's the villain. It almost makes me think that I never saw the Disney movie, like the live action with Emma, whatever her name is, Emma Stone. Yeah, but I almost feel like this is like Disney was like, oh, we gotta, like, if we're gonna make money on this movie. But I guess this is written in April though, huh? This is pretty recent.
Yeah. This is a new post, and it might be reflective of that. Because they want to, I don't know, highlight, and I didn't see it either.
The DVD
they
release.
they probably try to make her a sympathetic character in that to some degree with that, make her girl boss or whatever. But it's so funny because this shows how backwards your culture is when the New York Times is this supposedly prestigious newspaper, supposed to be the standard of journalism, highly regarded both in terms of content of reporting and serious matters, as well as just cultural touchstone for people. And when that is posting proudly articles where you're talking about, well, if you just put aside the evil things Hitler did, he was actually a pretty organized leader type rhetoric, you know that your cultural values are very, very, very dangerously in trouble. You shouldn't even be at a point where you're trying to redeem someone like that for as they are. I don't think that it's particularly deep, this article. I don't think they're trying to make an entire moral argument, but I think that it betrays the undercurrents of the culture's morality at the very least. What's the sort of backdrop and the worldview people have that informs the ability to even write something like this, even if they aren't trying to think of a deep philosophical justification for the ethics of her actions necessarily.
Yeah, it's very much the and you see this a lot in culture now, where it's like wanting to look back on pillars of understanding that we have, whether it's about, fictional characters or understandings of historical figures or anyone, and like trying to repaint them in a different light as like, no, they're actually like a good thing or they're a hero. It's like, no, there are some people that are evil, and this gal in 101 Dalmatians is evil. She wants to skin puppies, man. Like, just so she can have a nice fur coat. Like, there's nothing good about her in any shape or form, and there's nothing to rewrite. And it's really, I don't know. Like you were saying, like, it's a symptom of like the sickness of our culture, where it's like there's almost a desire to justify our own bad behavior by reframing, what we used to be commonly thought of as bad behavior. Even just the you saying that sounds like hyperbole. She wants to skin puppies for a fur coat. That's like when you're using a throwaway line to try to say, oh, this person's wrong, they probably hate puppies or something, and that's not even as bad as literally what it is.
and since when would the broader speaking cultural left go to rush to defend a billionaire like this? Oh yeah, every case where it helps them. Sorry, my bad.
I mean, her name is literally like long form for cruel. Like, it's
Cruel Devil. Yeah. Cruel Devil. Like, come on. Okay. Moving on from one cruel devil to another, because he's a politician. We've got Representative Jim Jordan, who tweets, "Fauci lost, freedom won." This just strikes me as so naive. One, I mean, to think that Fauci lost this battle, I don't know, man. Locking down the country for 2 years, convincing, I don't know how much of the population, a loud minority, if a minority, a very, very vocal minority, if minority, that these masks were worth it, even to the point where the officials, the CDC, Fauci himself, are saying you don't need them anymore, and yet people are rushing to cling to them. All of that having been done, I don't know that you could say Fauci lost and freedom won, let alone all of the other things going on in our society that are sort of antithetical to freedom. This just seems so naive. Like, you got the bully beat you up, he kicked you in the stomach, rolled you over, and you fell in a ditch. He looked over at the ditch, spat on you, and then walked away. And you're like, he walked away. I won.
Yeah, I was going to liken it more to like, that happens, but instead you're like, you get killed, you're murdered, right? and then 60 years later, the murderer dies, and they boldly proclaim, Donald won, his murderer lost. It's like, well, not exactly. Not exactly. Yeah. It's like, what part of freedom winning is this? You know, where tens of thousands of businesses are shut down and permanently stay shut down, where we literally printed ourselves into basically into oblivion under Trump on a bill. I don't know. I don't have his voting record, but I'm pretty sure Jim Jordan probably voted yes on the CARES Act or whatever it was called. Maybe you can look that up and confirm. You know, what part of Fauci losing does that sound like in freedom winning? Like, we've had all of our freedoms taken away. The administrative state has proven that with just a few words from some bureaucrat that's not elected, they can shut down everyone and ruin your life and totally change how, you know, basically because of one person's vote on the Supreme Court, people weren't fired from their jobs, right? That's how thin the line was for freedom losing, according to Jim Jordan. It's like, no, none of this is won. We've greatly expanded the administration state to the point that, like I was saying, they can do all these things and it's done by some bureaucrat that's not elected whispering a word. That's not winning. That is losing. And it's very typical of Republicans. You know, these conservatives that can serve nothing. They just kind of hold the line, and then once the left kind of settles back down for just a little bit to regroup, they're like, "Oh, we declare victory." It's like, no, you haven't won. You haven't won. You've just kind of you're staying standing, but the goalpost continues to move.
I will vindicate him slightly. He was one of 2 Ohio lawmakers to not vote for the bill in the House.
Good job, Jim Jordan. Good job.
So at the very least, maybe this is naive. You know, maybe at best he's just naive, not malicious there. But it is. I think one of the things that you're pointing out there is with all of the printing of money from it is to say, even if somehow you could guarantee that with the way that the rulings happened, that you prevented this thing from happening again, at least the lockdowns or the mask mandates. Like, let's say there was some provision that barred federal agencies from ever doing this type of thing again. You might have a little bit more justification to say freedom won, which we don't have. But even if you did, we still have to live with the inflation. We still have to live with the consequences on our culture, psychologically, with the deaths from suicide, with the lost experiences people had I saw this video of this baby who is walking around at this point and thinks every individual thing in public is a hand sanitizing station.
Oh my God.
Goes up to it to try to, and you know, some people look at it and they're like, oh, cute. No, that is scary. That is terrifying to see the, you know, kids enacting what realities are around them. I remember hearing about kids or parents talking about their kids when they give them their iPad and then they're in a book and they're like trying to swipe on the pages of a book, you know, and you're like, at that point, maybe you need to give the kid a little bit less of the iPad because that's going to be harmful for their perception of reality. And this was a government enforced perception of reality for children everywhere. So all of these long lasting repercussions still are with us, even if we somehow barred this from happening again, which we absolutely have not prevented from happening again. In individual cases, maybe there will be a little bit more resistance. I know that the Arizona House, I think, or maybe the both houses, of Congress signed a bill that would make churches a legally considered essential businesses in the case of a federal shutdown again. But like, that's one state out of 50 in one narrow thing, an important but narrow aspect of it. I don't think, unless we see this great freedom revival from the people, which I hope happens, but I don't think unless that actively happens, you could even pretend to claim that freedom started to win.
No, this is all here to stay. You know, my wife and I were able to go fly internationally, and for before we had the international flights, we had in United States flights. And I was like looking around, and I was realizing, you know what, because I was born before 9/11, and it's like, I remember a time when I could go to the gate to welcome someone home from a flight. I didn't have to go through anything. Like, it was pretty easy. And I was like, 9/11 happened, 2,000 people died, big tragedy, obviously, but like, that happened, and they set up this whole apparatus for security that does not work. Right? They tested it, and it's like they basically had some people try and break the security apparatus of the TSA, and it's like 99 out of 100 times they were able to get some sort of lethal weapon or bomb through security.
Actually, the last time I checked that statistic, it was actually zero. Like, they caught zero times. 100% of the attempts worked, from the one time I saw that study. So maybe that's changed, but
yeah.
There was a time at which 100%. Yeah, exactly.
That's a failing grade either way. So it's like, so you think about that, like, that's pretty analogous, right? We had a national tragedy, 2,000 people died. We set up this whole apparatus that still exists today, is ineffective and doesn't work. What do you think just happened? Like these people are saying, 600,000 people died, and they did, right, from COVID or whatever it is, 1 million people. I can't remember what it is at the current date. And they set up this whole apparatus where they could shut down everyone with a slick of a pen from a bureaucrat. It's like, that's not going away, man. Like, that's staying. That's like, compared to 9/11, this is a ginormous tragedy. And what's even funnier is, like, the actions against it are even less effective than on paper than than TSA. So it's like, it's the same thing. It's just going to be here forever. So the next time we have some sort of weird foreign disease show up here, is going to happen again. That's not winning. That's losing.
And to think that you even need the numbers to justify that is woefully misguided. Think about all of the mischaracterized and misclassed COVID deaths. When you create incentives for hospitals for funding reasons to count something as a COVID death, obviously the hospital operates in its own self-interest. A shocker to leftists everywhere. Hospitals act in their own self-interest, believe it or not. They actually don't prioritize patients over their own well-being because they have to stay in business. So when you put financial incentives for, in this particular case, you're going to see more COVID deaths naturally. Oh, what do you mean this person had comorbidities and died in a motorcycle accident? He had COVID, he tested positive with this very unreliable test, so that counts for our COVID death tally, so we get more funding. Just like in Palm Springs, they're, trying to this universal basic income program for people who identify as trans or bi. It's all about statistic manipulation. It's a very weird program. I don't know, the only purpose I see is to, bump up the number of people who identify in this sexual minority so you can get these stats up. So when people try to think of it in terms of, they can't really do this type of program again unless they can demonstrate something as viral as COVID-19 or as deadly or something. I don't think that's the case. I think if there is a will to manipulate numbers to operate and tell the story you want it to tell, they will absolutely do that and abuse it.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, our next post here. I saw this image from a tweet, but the tweet itself is not cringe. They were just highlighting this. And this book was found in the children's section at a bookstore in New York, Chelsea Market. And the children's book shows 4 skulls, and each skull is labeled. One Malayan, I think one is maybe Ethiopian, American, and Mongolian. I think those are the 4. It's kind of hard to read those from here, but I believe that's the demonstration. And the caption reads, "A long time ago, way before you were born, a group of white people made up an idea called race. They sorted people by skin color and said that white people were better, smarter, prettier, and that they deserve more than everybody else. Wow. I mean, this is just so funny. There's
it's a children's many aspects. Book, so written by a child.
Right. We were talking about this a little bit, so the first thing that I think is funny about it is they say that the idea of race is made up. It's an idea that was made up, but they say that the people who made it up are white people. So you can't say that white people made up an idea called race if that idea didn't exist already. How did the white people make it up? There had to have been pre-existing categories of people if you're going to say that a category of people made up the categories of people. It's a circular logic type thing. You can't say that an assembly machine built itself because the assembly machine needs to have been assembled by something other than itself. So you can't say one of these categories of people made up these categories of people out of nothing. There had to have been some kind of classification if your story holds, which of course is a very silly notion, and I think this person needs to check on their anthropology.
Well, it reminds me of this idea, right, of sorting people by their skin color, saying that some are smarter, better, prettier, whatever. That is a real idea, right? But the thing is, it wasn't invented just by white people. It exists across all cultures. It's a people thing. I spent a couple months in Africa, in South Africa specifically, in some of their they have these little shanty towns, which is basically like all the refugees from all over Africa come there because it's a little bit safer than where they're from, whether it's Rwanda or Uganda or any of those places. And they set up shop there, and within these shanty towns, right? Like from our standpoint in America, we classify all of the folks there as black, right? But even within there, they've got their own like racist things of like, hey, there's colored people and then there's black people. And they treat each other pretty poorly, right? Like if you remove the description and you didn't have a picture of who they were and you describe some of the ways these folks treat each other and how they segregate, it like reminds you of the South, right? It reminds you of like the worst stories of American racism. And so this exists all across all of, society. And all whether it's American society, some societies in Africa, societies in Europe. In fact, the word Slavic or the word slave came from the word Slavic, which were white people, right? Eastern Europeans. The other part that this kind of reminded me of, just the childlike way they look at history. And it's not a good thing. Like there's some things that are like this is childish, not childlike. I remember my brother and my youngest brother. We found he was writing a short story. He had just like learned to like read and write. I think he was maybe like, I can't remember how old he was. He was young. But anyways, he and my middle brother kind of had a little bit of strife when they were younger. And my youngest brother wrote this book called a short story called The Cave of Food and Gold. And basically it was a story about how my middle brother, basically was a king, a greedy king, and like he found the cave of food and gold and he kept it all for himself, and then my youngest brother like locked him in there and then he starved to death. And it's just like that's like a caricature of a villain, right? Like that's a childish understanding of like human motivation and how it all works. And it just reminded me of this. It's like there were some people and they're the evil villains of history, and they decided every one of them was smarter, better, and prettier, and you have no chance of ever succeeding because of what they did. It's like what a lame, childish way to look at history.
Well, and not to mention, I mean, to point out the obvious, this is extremely racist in and of itself.
Yes.
To blame the idea of all division of race evil coming from one race. Well, that is inherently racist. It's kind of the whole framework of critical race theory as well, where it's, you divide everyone based on these immutable characteristics, and then you assign worth and value to them based on your oppressed class. Because white people have these, privileges, they are the most evil. And so it's funny because it's almost so much projection from this book, where rather than them saying rather than it being white people made up this idea of race, it's like critical race theorists divided everyone up by their skin color and said that white people were more privileged and more evil and need to apologize. And then you categorize every single other category there based on that. So they may not judge people by what they think are prettier and smarter necessarily, but they do judge them by who deserves more or less than everybody else. That's absolutely a category that they use to judge on. So it's pretty frustrating to see this kind of thing being put out in children's literature, which at this point shouldn't be surprising, but it's still disgusting and sickening. So, okay, we'll move on to our next post here. And this comes from, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I've only ever read it. So it looks like it's Matthew Iglesias, probably, would be my guess.
I think that's right. Yep.
And he tweets, oh, this is such a good take. Medieval peasants had no student loan debt, no medical bankruptcies, and never had to worry about high gas prices. What went wrong? Capitalism. I mean, this is just galaxy brain take. Medieval. The thing that strikes me more
it's
than
still
anything
up too,
else,
man. It's still up.
Okay.
So, yeah.
The thing that strikes me more than anything else about this one is the fact that medieval times get brought up when they try to debunk capitalism, because they talk about feudalist societies and things like that. And so when it benefits them, they're going to say, oh, medieval peasants didn't have to worry about all these things. But when it doesn't benefit them, they're like, oh, you want to go back to feudalism like with medieval peasants? You can't have it both ways. You can't say society was both better and worse there, and that it both was and wasn't a symptom of capitalism and going back to feudalism. I mean, that's just entirely self-refuting. And then, of course, there's just the actual claims of everything that he makes that are just so goofy and silly. They had no medical bankruptcies because they had no access to actual doctors. And if they did, the service was very medieval and very, the accessibility was not there. You maybe had one doctor per town. There's so much wrong with it. It almost clouds my head. And you didn't have to worry about high gas prices, but you had to worry about high food prices because food was infinitely more difficult to come by.
Yeah, it was hard for me to believe this was serious when I first saw it. And I thought maybe you could file this under the category of accidentally based, because it is capitalism's fault that they didn't have to worry about that stuff, and now they do have to worry about it. There was no medical bankruptcies. You just died. Like, that's what happened.
Right.
There was no gas prices because there was no fuel. There were no cars. There was no student loan debt because there was no chance in hell you were going to go to a university as a peasant, right? Like, you were literally a slave to whoever lord you lived under, and at their whim you survived and were able to work. Capitalism, it was what made that all go away. Right? Like, the ability to have all these things is a result of capitalism. You ask any medieval peasant, would you rather stay here, or would you rather go live, in a one-bedroom apartment, and maybe you have to work 60 hours a week at a fast food restaurant, but you've got running water, you've got basically for most things, like, you've got penicillin, for God's sake. Like, if you get an infection, you can get penicillin and you can survive. Like, I'm pretty sure the medieval peasant would take it in a heartbeat. I don't think they would even have to think twice. Likewise, if you just put Matthew Iglesias for about half a day in medieval Europe, I think he would have a pretty hard time, and it would be trying to get his way back.
Yeah, in particular of all of these things, what does he say? No student loan debt really stands out to me, because you and I have talked about why student loan debt is not a good symptom of capitalism, but rather the complete opposite, when you have perverse incentives from the government to give out these loans beyond what students should be taking out, and then it inflates college prices, so then the loans have to get larger, and the only thing that's different between all these bigger and bigger loans is that administrators make more money off of it. But let's for the sake of argument here, let's assume that we're talking purely on a voluntary, no government involved student loan basis, and someone has to take out student debt and through a loan in order to go to school. According to Matthew Iglesias, it is better that you don't ever have the option or the opportunity to learn more through college learning, assuming, again, that let's assume for this, for all intents and purposes, that this college is beneficial, which college can be, but it's not always, but let's assume that it is in this case. He would rather that you not even have that opportunity to rise through the ranks of society or to better yourself through knowledge or to learn a skill and come out with debt. That exchange. He would rather you not have the option to access it than you coming out with debt on the other side of that. That to me is crazy. Now, again, I understand that the way that student debt is in our system is it's crippling, it's bad. That's not because of the capitalistic parts of of these loans. It's because of the inflation and the government-backed subsidies and these kinds of things. But even if you take out the government involvement of this, the capitalistic aspects of a loan and coming out with debt is that you agree that what you are getting is worth taking out a long-term payment for. So this person betrays his need for power to say, it is, I would rather our society not even let you make that decision for yourself. I would rather you be stuck as a poor, stuck as a peasant, and that way you're not burdened with the difficulties of debt. And I'm going to make that decision for you. That's better to me than you being able to decide if working and living with debt in an exchange for the opportunity to learn and grow a new skill and those types of things is worth it. You don't get to make that determination. I'm making it. It's not worth it. Carte blanche.
That's a good point.
Okay, and we'll move on to our last post for the episode. This one comes from Dan Rather. So we actually have a completely publicized episode here. No redactions here. We just got a lot of blue check marks.
Other than the author of that book. We don't know who it was, so.
That's true. If I knew the author, I'd probably out them, though, because they're a published author. Dan Rather tweets, I don't like wearing masks. No one does. I love seeing people laugh and smile. But I will never understand how a measure to protect your health and others became a major flashpoint. The price of freedom is high, and it isn't wearing some cloth over your face. First of all, when he says, I don't like wearing masks, no one does, he needs to watch one of our early episodes where where someone on your feed talked about how they loved wearing masks because it made their face nice and warm and cozy. But, wow. I mean, goodness. The price of freedom is high. I almost kind of have whiplash from him saying this, because it's like, are we talking about the neocon war invasion talking points here, or are we talking about COVID? It seems to me a complete non sequitur, and it's this double think that they always try to convince you of, to say, no, you have to comply in order to preserve freedom. You have to completely abandon the principle that you're talking about in order to save that principle. It's just like when conservatives say things like, we need to use the government to reduce the size of government. It's the exact same type of thing where they're like, no, we're going to make a law that prevents, some new branch of government from growing, and then that power gets flipped and reversed because it never works. And the same thing here. The price of freedom isn't wearing some cloth over your face. It's like it's not the battle to pick for freedom. And it's like, so you're just saying that we should, let our freedom be violated because the price of freedom is high? I do not understand. It just reeks to me of like propaganda. I'm an NPC and I only have one talking point here that I can come up with.
Yeah, there's a lot of things about this, and the reason I thought this was a good one to go through is I think it's very symbolic of the way a lot of like normal people that don't pay attention to politics think, right? Which is, it's like, hey, like, it's just a cloth. Like, why don't you just wear it? Like, maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't. And it's like, no, that's not the point. The point isn't whether I should wear a mask or not. Like, the point is that someone is saying, hey, potentially we'll throw you in jail and or kill you if you don't wear this mask, because that's what is attached to every law that is ever made, right? Is the fact that, hey, the government's saying you must do this, including a parking ticket, right? Like, think about what happens if you don't pay a parking ticket. If you don't pay a parking ticket, you get another parking ticket, or you keep getting fees and fines. And if you don't pay those, eventually someone shows up at your door and says, you must pay these. And if you say, I'm not going to pay them, eventually the cops show up. And if you say, I'm not going with you to the jail, you're going to get in a firefight, right? That is the price of every law, is attached to it, that you can be killed for not obeying it. And so that's what is attached to these masks. And to steelman it even further, right? Like, let's say we did have a pandemic that was like 99% of people that caught COVID died, right? Or caught this disease. We had airborne Ebola. Even in that scenario, you wouldn't have to mandate masks. You wouldn't have to mandate things, because people would naturally do them, because they look around, they see the results, and they're incentivized to, right? And so it's like, it just doesn't follow, right? Like, to a normie, to someone who doesn't pay attention to this, it's like, well, it's just a normal thing. It's like, no, like, don't you see that this is just all an effort for control, right? Like, none of this makes sense. It's very Orwellian. Freedom is slavery, right? Like, they use these opposing ideas, and they have doublespeak, and they make it so that you can't actually think for yourself. The only way to think is to obey what they tell you to, and that is kind of the underlying problem with our society right now, is we just don't care about the truth. Right? Like, we look at that Cruella post earlier. It's like, no, the truth is she's a bad person. Like, you can't reformat that to suit your personal desire to, like, reframe your own past. It's like, at some point in the past, you were a bad person. Like, own up to it and do better. The cloth over your face is a lie. And as long as we keep admitting and as long as we don't admit it, and as long as we keep living within that lie, like, things are not going to get better, and more lies will continue, and more things that are bad will continue to happen, because people won't stand up for the truth. And that's what I think that is the price of freedom, right? Is to stand up for the truth, no matter what the cost is, even if it's a small little lie. Of course, it's not that big of a deal to put a thing over your mouth, but it is a big problem to participate in a lie, no matter how small it is.
Right. And the other aspect of this is, at what point are people like this willing to look back and admit that the terms by which they are measuring everything here, the basis of their arguments relies on the fact that they are correct, right? Again, your and my principle relies on the principle of freedom, right? As you've just beautifully articulated. Their claim here necessitates that, this small inconvenience, quote unquote, is worth off saving, these lives and causing X outcome. But the problem is, none of the facts back them up. When you look at studies after study that is coming out and just unequivocally demonstrating that the lockdowns did nothing to mitigate the virus. When you see study after study showing that the only effective mask policy would be a properly worn N95 policy, which was never, ever mandated, as far as I know, on the federal level. There may have been some mandates for individual institutions or individual industries with N95s. But as far as I'm aware, no mask mandate that happened on county level or federal level required N95s. So, when you look at those, and these are the things that are being enforced to the point of violence, as you pointed out, and they're not putting out the result that his claim necessitates, then you realize, oh, this person is saying, I don't understand how this became a major flashpoint. It's because you never looked at the data correctly, and you bought the propaganda and you peddled the propaganda. That's why you don't understand. It's not because you're a genuinely curious person who just can't possibly understand. You've never even tried to understand the opposing viewpoint. That's why you don't understand, because you cannot possibly fathom that there is a side to this argument that isn't just plain evil if they don't agree with you, or just plain stupid.
Yeah, there's just no desire. And you would think for someone like Dan Rather, who's supposed to be, journalist extraordinaire in search of the truth, it's like, you would think he would care more about what the actual truth is, right? Like, I have no problem if someone believes one statistic versus another. It's like, that's your right to choose what you believe and to choose what you think and to look at the data and come to your own conclusions, as is mine. And then as is mine to live out what I see the conclusions being. Did you see Wonder Woman 1984? Did you watch that movie?
No, I didn't. I didn't.
Terrible movie. Terrible movie. Like, poorly executed. But the core, the core like theme of it is actually pretty good. And I'll defend it. And that, like, the Wonder Woman's like point is like, hey, nothing good comes from lies. And there's kind of a businessman in it, and they're trying to make him look like Trump and stuff. But basically, like, he's able to like grant people wishes, but they're fake, right? Like, they're not actually true. They're just kind of they're cardboard cutouts of the actual wishes, and they always end in tragedy because it's not true, right? To actually earn something, to get a position, you actually have to like do the work to get there, or else it's not actually real. And I see that like within our society, just we don't even care anymore about the truth. We only care about looking like we are virtuous, and in an effort to look like we're more virtuous, like, it's whatever emotionally appeals, right? It's like, well, wearing a mask makes me seem empathetic, so I'm going to continue to do it. It's like, no, I think what you should care about is this actually working? Because that, what was the post we had? We had a post about this kind of earlier. I'm blanking on it.
For this episode here?
Not this episode. It was about looking empathetic. Or I want to be I want to be with the group of people that are. You know it better than me, I hope. I can't remember it.
Yeah, it was the like, even if this was wrong, I would still rather live with people who care enough to be empathetic towards people.
Yes, yeah, and wear a mask and take a vaccine and stuff. It's like, dude, like, what if, like, your point on that episode was like, what if the government was saying, hey, to be empathetic and caring, you have to chop off your left arm?
Yeah, right.
Like, that's not very compassionate, to not do your research and be like, I'm going to look at this a little skeptically and maybe review whether this is actually the most empathetic thing to do. Being informed by the truth and making an educated decision and making a wise decision is critical to actually it being an empathetic decision. Otherwise, it's just a decision that's actually selfish because it's all based in fulfilling what you think you need to feel to feel good about yourself.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Be more Batman, less I don't know who else, but the Dark Knight, the hero that you need, not the hero that they want.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's frustrating too, because I think for as much as I am skeptical of Dan Rather in particular asking these things or saying these things, I think there is a great large number of people who share this sentiment but are genuinely like don't understand.
Sure.
And I think that's the other great evil of this is people like him for some reason have some level of influence and could communicate to these people that there is more than what they are selling, essentially. There are other perspectives about this. There is a claim to self-autonomy and freedom, and they choose to not inform, and so many people are left wondering, like, why is this? And I think people generally speaking, on our side of the political spectrum tend to at least have enough intellectual curiosity to do that research on why someone else might think differently than them. If for no other reason than to bolster your own arguments. But we at least do that effort. And there's a lot of people who genuinely aren't being told that people who disagree with them on this have something to say, and they aren't just evil Nazis. And people like Dan Rather, they act innocent here. I just don't understand it. And the entire time they are communicating to people that anyone who disagrees with this is a bad person, is evil. And I just don't understand how that could be.
Yeah. My last thing on this one before we wrap, but one of the things you said in a past episode that I thought was great was that people that are principally based as opposed to power based in their or outcome based, I guess you could say, in the way they look at the world and politics and control, is that when you don't know something, like, you're able to look at it through the lens that does actually help you understand it, right? Because when you're looking at a lens from like, well, I want this outcome to happen, or I need to have this much power so I can make the outcome that I want to have happen. Like, you're actually not able to look at the world in a truthful way. Like, you're looking at it in such a way that is framed and distorted through that perspective of how does this fit and serve my needs. When you're principally based, it's like, no, like, does this match up the way we're responding to this, or the way we're, approaching it, or the way this is being acted upon? Does it fit within the principles? Because if not, then it's a non-starter, right? Like, we don't even go down that path. It's like, that can't be it. And then you can actually get to the heart of whatever it is you're analyzing actually is. And the way that applies to like this deal is like, hey, like, I don't know whether masks work or whether they don't work, but I know the best way to figure out whether they do or don't work is to let everyone make their own decision, right? Because the collective intelligence of everyone making their own decisions is going to yield the data that makes us able to, to actually understand what's happening and see through the fog of war.
And just remember that the media will always peddle that whatever crisis is in front of us now is the biggest crisis, the most important crisis. If you don't believe me, all you have to do is look at the rhetoric surrounding every single election. Every single presidential election cycle in particular, you hear, this is the most important election of our lifetimes. You'll hear it every time because they don't care about the truth. They just want to get you to act in a certain way. So even though it's scary, you're told, well, we can't let people experiment, and like Britt was saying, we can't for this one. This one's too important. This was too dangerous. They will always tell you that. Yes. And that's when you need to have that principle all the more, like we were talking about earlier. In order to hold these principles, you need to hold through to them even when it's difficult, even when it seems like it might be dangerous or whatever the case is, because in the end, you will get vindicated. You will be proven right.
Yep.
And it's unpopular to be principled in many cases, but eventually things usually do come around, hopefully. So, okay, well, that's our show for today. Once again, if you would leave a like, a comment, subscribe, all of those good things, we really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks for listening, and we will see you on the next one.